The world is changing fast. New technologies are impacting how we think about products, services, and the way we live our lives. Nowhere is this trend more present than in financial services, where new business models and customer expectations are changing our conceptions about banking, finance, and the very nature of money. Welcome to Rebank, a visionary podcast about banking, fintech, and the future. The future of banking is here.
Hello and welcome to Rebank. I'm your host, Will Beeson. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Danny Gilligan, back for round 2 with Rebank, this time to discuss the future of data. Danny is the co-founder of Data Republic, a company building the rails to support the emerging data industry. Danny is also co-founder and managing partner of Reinventure, an Australia-based, fintech-focused venture capital firm. Danny joined us in episode 28 in late February with his Reinventure partner Simon Cant to talk fintech investing, and we promised we'd follow it up with an episode on data at some point. Connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or on our website at bankingthefuture.com. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice and leave us a review. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please welcome Danny Gilligan. Danny Gilligan, welcome to Rebank.
Pleasure to be here again, Will.
Yeah, you're right. Welcome back, I should have said. It's great to have you again. So we had talked during our first conversation about doing a follow-up episode at some point around data, which is, I guess a topic we've touched on a few times on the show. I've had some great guests on in the past. I think your views were particularly interesting toward the end of that first conversation and absolutely worth diving into in more detail. You are a venture capitalist with Reinventure. You're also the co-founder of a data company in Australia called Data Republic. And I think with that experience, both, I suppose, coming from within the world of hard data science and also the kind of the broader view that you have as a fintech-focused venture capitalist, you probably have some very interesting context and insight as to the power of data, the transformational power, especially around financial services.
Yeah, that's correct, Will. In fact, for a bunch of reasons, hopefully we'll get through during the course of this conversation, we think that data itself as an industry is perhaps the single biggest adjacency next to financial services that's going to emerge from this whole technology transformation that's rolling not just through financial services but other industries as well. And so, as a venture capitalist, we've made quite a few bets in the emerging data stack, if you will.
Mm-hmm. What are the biggest kind of macro factors that are contributing to the boom in data science at the moment?
Well, when we think about data as an industry, it's probably a perfect storm, really, of a couple of macro factors that are intersecting at a really interesting time. Of course, there's the technology piece, which is probably broken up into storage and compute power. Cloud computing, AWS, is really transforming the way that everyone can deal with their own data at one level. So that processing capability and particularly the cost of working with data is plummeting. Secondly is the sheer explosion in the amount of data. So that's, the whole IoT boom, but also just digitization of core processes as various industries absorb digital technology further into their value chains and customer experiences. It just continues to increase the data exhaust that's given off, which then creates pretty rich material to work with from a data perspective. And then you've got the last bit of the technology layer is all of the processing capabilities and analytical tool sets that are developing, and particularly the open source movement, which just gives rise to low cost, high quality processing and analytical capability and visualization capability. That's kind of giving one kind of wave of movement. At another level, we've got the more productive emergence of artificial intelligence, machine learning, which is really born on the accessibility to that data and that compute power. And then the last two, for me, which are the most interesting, are this regulatory intervention, which we see particularly in some of the more progressive fintech economies. And I'd call out in particular the UK, Singapore and Australia here in that category, who are driving this, starting with financial services and their own governments, this very progressive open data movement, which is opening up government data to be accessible to citizens and companies, and then requiring the opening up of banking data. And those two movements, I think, are a signal of what's to come more broadly across the economy in terms of open data as a policy setting, if you will, which is going to change a lot of things. And then finally, on top of all of that, I think we're starting to see this shift in consumer attitude. I mean, we've always got these concerns around privacy, but for me, people are becoming clearer about this concept of enabling data to be utilized as long as there is adequate compensation in the form of some kind of engagement currency like loyalty points, or in terms of a high quality, free or digital experience or personalized experience for consumers. So, consumers are happy to have Google and Facebook trade in their data as long as they get the utility of those experiences. And I think that's the same for lots of other industries. As long as consumers are getting high quality, personalized experiences, they're more open to the way their data is used by those organizations. So I think between kind of cloud compute, power, storage processing, the open source technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, this huge regulatory intervention, which is starting in banking and shifting consumer behaviors, that's opening up this transformation of industries through data and the emergence of a data industry in its own right.
I think for me, it feels like we're on the cusp of a transition from a period of kind of excitement around the power of data to a fundamentally different data-driven experience in the future, which is effectively leveraging all these powerful engines that have been built, but starting to, for the first time, really apply meaningful amounts of data, which allow us to glean really meaningful insights. Because, it seems to me the interest is there, the investment is often there, but the results in terms of actually applying data science to extract actionable insight has kind of failed at the moment. I think you guys even used the analogy of the Ferrari with no gasoline in our previous conversation.
Yeah, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. We're kind of swimming in data and technologies that can utilize data. But in terms of what are actionable insights and having data that can be consumed as a consumable product, we're not there yet on the maturity curve. I think we're still at a very embryonic stage. And so at the moment, it's exactly that the Ferrari petrol analogy. We've got lots and lots of great application layer companies that can drive pretty effective personalization, insights, targeting, pricing, risk management, etc. But they're limited only by the data that they can consume. So for me, the single biggest thing that's missing, we think, in this entire industry is what we call banking infrastructure for data, which is what we're attempting to solve with Data Republic. And the analogy I like to use here with money is if you think about the history of money in banking, we used to keep money, gold, cash notes, etc., under our mattress. We used to take it down to the bank in town. We used to stick it in the safe. We used to move money around between towns on trains and stagecoaches. And it was incredibly difficult to move money around, and it wasn't very secure. It wasn't until we created the modern banking industry that enabled money to move digitally through accounts, and then a payments network that extended out to merchants beyond that we were able to move money about at the speed of light. And that governance, security, privacy, trust, and the liquidity and mobility of money really led to credit creation and our ability to leverage money into an economy, which drives massive economic growth. So where I think we're at with data is we're still at the stagecoach, money under the mattress stage of data. So when you think about the way that companies deal with data today, they largely have data stuffed inside vaults inside their own companies. So these are legacy organizations with their transactional data assets. And trying to move data between organizations to share insights is the equivalent of trying to put it onto a stagecoach or a train and send it between towns. And we don't have yet the banking infrastructure for data that enables data to flow with the same security, privacy, governance, trust, and mobility as we do with money. And I think when we get to that, when we get to have high velocity data, we'll end up with very low cost consumable data products that will largely inform an infinite number of experiences in our economy.
Okay, so how is a company like Data Republic trying to solve that problem in practical terms?
A lot of the ways that that people are solving, a lot of data companies that are addressing data sharing or new insights that can be unlocked and new applications that can be developed by bringing data together from different organizations. They often do it in a vertically integrated way, which is a perfectly normal way to address something in a value chain when the value chain doesn't work very well. And you've seen that time and time again in different technology stacks. So you get someone who builds end-to-end, bringing together a small cooperative sets of data, usually in the task with the same issue, into a single environment, and then builds the end application that brings back to those contributors a solution that works across industry or cross contributors. So it's this vertically integrated solution, and that might take a particular amount of time to kind of resolve for that particular use case. And then every single use case that goes beyond that is a whole new application stack that gets put together. What we're trying to do with Data Republic is create the first truly horizontal layer and a platform which then enables all of those use cases to happen at speed and at scale. So in those bilateral data sharing arrangements that occur, the most significant piece of friction is generally the legal framework that exists around sharing data between two organizations. And that might take on average 6 to 9 months for each different bilateral agreement to take place. Then you have the technology issue around, who puts whose data where and how do you manage privacy, et cetera, et cetera. And then beyond that, you've actually got the analytics. Now, in that whole 6 to 9 month period of time, the actual analytical work is days or weeks at most. It's the very, very small part of the overall equation. And so what we've tried to do at Data Republic is to collapse down that time frame for a data share so that everybody signs first the same legal framework to be part of a single ecosystem. And then from within that, data contributors can manage on-platform data sharing and through consistent governance, privacy, security, et cetera. And ultimately, we get to people innovating and creating brand new data products at speed.
So effectively, the data contributors would also be benefiting from the data contributed by others. Is that the idea?
Correct. So it can be private consortium. So organisations who are already conducting data sharing might choose to do it via Data Republic privately amongst each other, in which case it just massively lowers the cost and time taken to conduct that data share. Organisations might open up their data to innovators who might have ideas to build new products on top of that data and do that through a well-governed manner. Or they might just enter into a universe of discovering themselves new organisations to partner with, to share data, et cetera. So, in some respects, it's like a cooperative. Data Republic itself doesn't control any access to any of the data. Each individual data contributor has full control over their data and how it gets used in every single instance. And what we really do is create the environment and the marketplace and the governance and security framework to enable people to trade in confidence. A little bit like how the stock exchange, I guess, works for companies who are listed. It just creates the space and the confidence in the overall marketplace, and enables those transactions to happen at speed in a deep and liquid market.
And how do large organizations, especially regulated organizations, get comfortable with the security and privacy elements? Because presumably, if they're contributing data and that data is for whatever reason compromised, the regulatory, legal, pecuniary liability falls back to them.
Yes, that's a key point, and we've had to start with. We have started in Australia with some of the most conservative organisations. We have two of the major four banks in Australia, and Westpac and NAB, as initial data contributors. Qantas, which is the largest airline and largest loyalty program operator in Australia, the third largest supermarket, and then an array of other contributors in various industries as our initial 20 or so data contributors to the marketplace. So you can imagine, particularly for two competing banks to be on the same platform We've had to answer all of the questions, not just around security, privacy, etc., but particularly around governance and competitive governance, so that those organisations can participate in that marketplace with confidence, knowing that their competitor is not in any way disadvantaged through that proximity to their data.
So we're in the process, certainly in the banking world, I think in a number of other industries too, of a shift toward an open data world from a closed data world. Will things like open banking and the kind of open availability of certain types of bank data mean that you guys can pull that data directly for yourselves and effectively do analysis and then provide that insight onto third parties?
Yeah, so Data Republic itself won't be pulling any individual data. Data Republic is a pure platform, which means we neither want to compete as a data contributor, nor do we want to compete with the application layer companies who are building the new data products and applications that exist on top. We see our role strictly as providing that one very thin layer of that horizontal layer, which is around governance and marketplace dynamics. So we think the open data world will increase the velocity of data sharing in the economy. And we're working with some of the banks here around looking at how they might respond to open data in a platform and enablement sense here. Although it's very early stages in the Australian economy relative to that policy work. But definitely what you're going to see more generally is an increased velocity of customer data moving across different silos. And that's happening in some respects in the shadows today in the economy. So there's the grey market for data. The objective of Data Republic is to bring that into the light and make that open and transparent and well governed, not just for companies, but ultimately for consumers as well. So they have a sense of confidence about how their data is being utilised by different organisations, how that sits within their own personal consent frameworks, and potentially, ultimately, how they're participating financially in the transactions that are utilising their own data.
I think we're very much in agreement as to the current evolution of the world of data. What is the world going to look like when this evolution continues, when it's complete? What are the implications for banks and fintechs specifically?
Yeah, look, I think the ultimate, the thing that I'm most excited about is, I think the belief that we have at Data Republic is that data is the single most significant lever for microeconomic and social reform in the next 2 decades. So I know that's a big statement, so let me unpack that a little bit. In terms of microeconomic reform, I think what we'll see is a massive change in efficiency and a significant improvement in customer experiences through data. There's that old adage that half marketing is wasted, you just never know which half. I think personalization through data is going to have a material impact in companies' abilities to offer the right products at the right price to the right customer at the right time. And we've only just started tapping into what that stuff looks like. I think that there's so much efficiency in supply chains, in relationships between different organizations, and in friction of experiences generally, which can be removed by data. An example of that in a banking context is, when I fly to San Francisco and I have not contacted the bank before I've left and then go to pay for dinner with my credit card, sometimes it might be blocked by the fraud teams who didn't anticipate a transaction showing up in another market. But if the airline is able to share safely and securely and privately certain aspects of my travel itinerary, then the bank might know not to cancel my credit card for transactions in that particular geography in that time frame. And so what I get as a consumer is a seamless background personalized experience. And what the bank has is lower churn and lower costs. And if you take that scenario and multiply that by 1,000, you can kind of get a sense of the huge efficiency gains that can be made in terms of cost in an organization, but also the huge improvement in customer experiences. And from a social reform point of view, one of the things that we have built on top of Data Republic is a not-for-profit foundation called the Minerva Collective, which is really an affiliation of volunteer data science talent and organizations working to build new data products on top of existing transactional data from our data contributors for the not-for-profit sector. And they're currently working on initiatives like domestic violence, childhood obesity, social isolation, and there's a variety of other insights, addiction, that can be gleaned from looking in new ways at transactional data, which give insights to not-for-profit organisations who've never had access to data about how to move from dealing with the effects to actually preventative measures and interventions earlier on. So they can create entirely new programs to address material health and social issues in our society through access to data. So we kind of see a world of infinite applications that can be utilised to improve experiences across organisations, improve experiences for consumers, drive better outcomes for society. And, one of the ultimate beneficiaries of that is government, which is why I think in part they're leading some of this open data movement with their own data.
How does the whole kind of AI and machine learning space developments that we're seeing in those technologies play into the broader subject of data, specifically some of the applications that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's interesting because obviously we've had a couple of waves of AI ML now. We've had a big wave a few years ago with some of the general platforms, which were largely acquired, adopted, absorbed by some of the major technology groups, and fantastically they've all largely been made open source now. And so what we're seeing in the next phase here is a lot more vertical applications in AI/ML, which really reflect a couple of things. One is that the algorithmic layer is largely commoditizing. That's a belief that we hold pretty deeply, and we're seeing at Data Republic is any insights that can be developed at the data product or algorithmic layer ultimately commoditize. Once they're seen, they can be replicated. But in these vertical applications in AI/ML, it's really about someone developing an end-to-end product solution which does a couple of things. It embeds delivery of the experience in the use of that product. Through the use of that product, they gain proprietary access to data in that vertical application, and then they're able to leverage the best-in-class AI/ML to create a continuously improving product on that basis. So, I think by opening up all of this data and leveraging a lot of the existing AI/ML technologies, you're going to see, again, an infinite number of new applications that are able to be developed, which deliver, through that proprietary access to data, new insights through an end-to-end experience for a customer.
I want to pick up on one thing that you said there, which relates to one of the points we discussed previously. You mentioned that in your view, the algorithmic layer will be commoditized as we go. Has the nut been cracked around gleaning powerful insight from large amounts of data? i.e., is it simply a question of making that data available to algorithms and processing engines, and the outputs will be ready to go? Or is there more development work to be done in terms of techniques to actually kind of distinguish what are meaningful correlated pieces of data with what aren't?
Look, I think there'll always be more work to be done there in the general capability sense. Where I think there is still lots and lots of new ground is as you bring different data sets together, you're going to get an entirely new ways to be able to look at old problems, if that makes sense. And I think that's particularly going to see a lot of what we call the data wars, where industries attack other industries by virtue of the data insights that they've got that the competing industry doesn't have. So, for instance, who's better placed to price a health insurance product, a health insurer or a supermarket that sees what your diet looks like? And particularly when that supermarket is able to combine their data with maybe your gym. That's a pretty fulsome picture for what your likely health risk looks like, as opposed to the form that I fill out and submit to the health insurer, where I'm probably going to paint a much rosier picture of my state of health than what it actually is. So I think as data gets combined, there's still a ton of new insights to be discovered using techniques that are continually improving. What I mean by commoditize is once it's been discovered, it's not particularly protectable, if that makes sense. So once someone knows that if you combine these two data sets, you get this insight, then people can kind of pretty much figure it out. So there's limited enduring value at the algorithmic layer is the way I would phrase it. You need to be more than a data product builder. You need to build an end-to-end solution.
We talked about the role of regulation in driving the openness of data and some of these new opportunities. Yeah, I think most people would agree that regulation plays an important role in consumer protection as well, and I think that that's a point that's important to address in any kind of broad conversation about data, the sharing of data. What's your view on consumers' level of responsibility for the decisions they make with their data? To what extent should that responsibility lie with the consumers themselves? To what extent should it lie with the processors of data?
Yeah, look, I think there are three constituents in this kind of responsibility set. There's the consumer themselves. There's the data collector, if you will, or data contributor, and then there are the organizations who do work with data. I think it's a shared responsibility collectively around consumer privacy. I think to date, consumers have had limited control. You either choose a service or not. You can't unbundle your consent around data from the service itself, generally. I think you'll start to see some changes there. I think you'll start to see consumers have more visibility and control around how their data gets used. But at the same time, I don't think the pendulum can swing to the point where we think that consumers own all the data, because the organizations who collect the data need that to run their business. So there'll always be this kind of dual custodianship around the data. And so I think the ultimate end game will be some kind of dual consent system around corporates and consumers around how that data gets used in a more liquid and mobile fashion across the data economy.
Just to wrap up, I feel like there's an outstanding question that I should ask, which is around the actual kind of technologies and techniques for sharing data, privacy, security. Certainly, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies have been proposed as solutions to some data sharing challenges. Do you view blockchain as relevant in all this? I mean, is the point to get to zero knowledge proofs and being able to confirm yes or no without actually sharing data? Or are you guys focused on a more open, transparent, secure, private sharing system between small numbers of consensual parties?
Look, I think there are two things. I think there's a spectrum that kind of runs left to right on that answer today, and I think there's also a longitudinal answer as well. So I'll look on the left to right. There's data which can just be open, kind of a binary sense, 0 and 1, and a lot of the open data that governments are pushing down at the moment is, I'll make the same data accessible to a high-end analytics company as I do to a 16-year-old high school student. And so, it has to be digestible in a form that anyone can access. And there's data that's so sensitive it's wrapped under layers of regulation like health data. And so sharing that sometimes means that you can only share it using, something like homomorphic encryption, which some organizations are exploring today, which is very, very high cost and low velocity data sharing. So, and in between that world, there's, the classic 50 shades of grey. And so I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach from a technology point of view to that entire spectrum today. And so that's where, we think something like a Data Republic has a role to play, because it can capture that 50 shades of grey in terms of how I want to allow different kinds of organisation with different governance controls around access to data. And I also think in relation to a blockchain perspective, there's still a lot of maturity to occur with underlying blockchain technology, and particularly its accessibility more broadly by end users. But it definitely has a role to play longer term, particularly perhaps point to point around consumers. But consumers aren't really users of data products themselves today, outside of the experiences that they're purchasing from other organizations. And so the market today for data products is still very much a B2B market. The bit where I think there might be more of a role for blockchain to play in the near term is around identity and consumer consents and the consumer currency that goes along with trading and consents. And that's where I think that we'll probably see a hybrid between traditional approaches to maybe a marketplace between organizations in a B2B sense and classic platform technology, and then some of the blockchain to emerge around engaging consumers in that overall ecosystem.
Danny, I think you shared contact information last time we talked, but maybe you could remind people where they can find you and also maybe where they can get more information about Data Republic.
Sure. So I'm Twitter at Danny Gilligan, DANNYGILLIGAN, and Data Republic is www.datarepublic.com.
Great. Danny Gilligan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Will. Pleasure to be on your show again.
Thanks for tuning into Rebank. If you like today's show, reach out. Follow us on Twitter at Rebank Podcast and join the conversation. For more on banking, fintech, and the future, check out our regular content at www.bankingthefuture.com.